most of you know, but I'll just update what we did in the last year. Okay, and then we'll start with our. Okay, so like I'll just say like briefly go. There's a lot of issues in India, like in every country nowadays. Okay, so there's an issue like people say the third world country or like developed country. So we have an issue with education, agriculture, livelihood, corruption is a big challenge, and women's issues, energy, and environment, and where we guys are fighting a lot to find some solutions. So the problem is like most of the issues are interconnected. You cannot solve only energy without taking care of the environment. So you have to interconnect it. So the AID is called Association for India's Development. Is the organization is like yeah like no it's a US based organization. So it's a US based non-profit organization, and we try to solve the problems like it's a interconnected problems, and we have tried to find the solutions by doing our actively engagement, and because the solutions are interconnected, and also we try to find the local solutions. If like in the India, we'll try to find the local solutions, and also influence policies to make the people friendly. So the aid is like more than 25 years. So it has started like by the group of like some graduate students. So like us, like the most of people are graduate students here. So it's more than 25 years. So you can see how reliable and how robust this organization is. And it has more than like 1,000 volunteers and has a 50 chapters all over the world. And there's a 36 chapters in US, and we have a Minnesota chapters like in the middle, like you can see in the north middle, and mostly like it's spread across the US. And there's a chapters in Canada, Australia, South Africa, United Kingdom, UK, and India. So what we do? So at US, we create the awareness. We just understand and discuss about the problems, and we also raise the fund, and then we collaborated with the NGOs and do the projects on the ground level, grassroots level. Okay, so that like the solution can be reached to the real people. Okay. So in 2017, AID Minnesota chapter sponsored 5 projects. So I'll start from the top, like Himdara, which is like environmental project, like related to environment. And these are 5 different projects, and we already spent like around $13,000 only the AID Minnesota chapters. Okay, so there's other chapters who gave up more funds, and it's a student chapters, but we are thankful to all the volunteers. So we raised more than 13,000, and we supported 13,000 and supported 5 projects. I think some people will go like a little bit briefly about the projects, other different variety of projects.
Um, Hi everyone. So I'll make this quick. This won't be linger too much in these slides. So the first project that we took up was in 2015 itself, and it was in it's based in Anukul district of Odisha, where there is a huge population of tribal communities in that area. So in this project, the aim was to generate alternative sources of livelihood for these rural communities because most of them are farmers and because they have to their entire livelihood depends upon farming. So which is why during sporadic rainfall they have to suffer a lot. The crops suffer and hence they suffer too. So here the aim was to generate alternative sources of livelihood and that it introduce them to animal farming, introduce them to backyard horticulture and such so that they get more sources of food and yeah, basically ensuring food security in the process. So we had done this in this project. We have already done 2 site visits, and these are pictures from one of the site visits. I think. So if you look at the second picture in the bottom, it's a family. If you see the family we are standing with, so these family have supported their son's education. I think up to the bachelor's diploma level, simply by growing these crops and selling them. And the NGO has, in many ways, basically empowered these people in that by providing them with subsidized seeds and also making them aware of a lot of government schemes, which a lot of these people are not aware of, but something that they can take advantage of. The second project, the SKM as Sankthan Kisan Mazdoor Sangathan, is based in Uttar Pradesh. And in as a lot of you might be aware, under the Narega and Manrega Act, people are entitled to guaranteed employment. Either guaranteed, the government, or rather the local government, I mean, the local district officials have to either ensure them guaranteed employment or provide them with compensation if they're not able to give them employment. But even if these laws are out there, these facilities are out there for the people, but they're very much a lot of the times not implemented. So what the NGO does is basically mobilizes the rural communities, mainly laborers and farmers, and yeah, they basically go out there to the district officials' office, and then they protest and make sure that they get their compensation. In the third project, which is Sinchan, and it is based in West Bengal, this project is based in this red light area in West Bengal, in Baruipur area. So the aim of this project, the work of this project has been basically educate children of sex workers in this red light area. And by educating, I mean not just making sure that they do well in the class, but also making sure that they're accepted by the rest of the community, because a lot of the problems which arises for these children is not just the fact that they can't keep up with school, but the fact that they're many times ostracized by the normal masses because of where they come from. So basically they have set up a daycare center where they're provided with daily hygiene utilities, and they have tutors as well who help them with classes so that they keep up. These are photos from site visit that one of our members did, I think 2 years back. And the last project, okay, the another project is based. This is based in Bangalore, Deepa Academy. What the NGO does is it works with visually challenged children, and Aid Minnesota actually helps sponsor a computer center for these visually challenged kids. So if you'll observe, so the point of having a computer center for them is that they should be trained in computers so that they're proficient with using the computers, and then basically that makes sure that when they are of age, they can basically go into any kind of computer-based jobs, such as call centers. Yes, call centers. So this is like I mean, opening up an avenue of for employment for them, for these kids in the future, by making them proficient. And then finally, Himdana project, which is based in Himachal. And so, as you might know, there are several pharmaceutical companies which keep sprouting up in Himachal Pradesh. And the a problem with these companies is that they do not, the waste disposal, no, they totally do not abide by the waste disposal norms. As you all know, these waste disposal rules are anyway slackened in India, and pretty much these industries, they can get by with having to conform with absolutely no set of rules at all. So this is a challenge that this NGO is trying to tackle. There is a video which, okay.
Okay, so we need the funds for the project, and the mega campaign is the Run for Change campaign. And last year, we basically train people to running, and there's novice people who start running. Okay, and last year, six people run 10 miles, and two of us run the full marathon, and we raised around $12,000. Okay, by reaching all the communities, by reaching the people to whom we know. And this year we already started around 10 people going to run this year for 10 miles, and I think 4 people are going to run the full marathon. Okay. And other things like we do a couple of volunteering, and also we get donations from the from publics and who wants to donate and believe on our cause. So it also organize seminar talk. Every semester we organize the talk. So this is the summer series. Okay, in the summer and in the fall also we organize the talk. And also we collaborated with the ICGC, Interdisciplinary Center for Global Change, and we collaborate with them and do the talks. So you are welcome to join us in the talks and the future talks also. So in coming things so we have a Run for Change campaign which is already started. It will go from June to October, and we are also participating in the India Fest. It's all the Indian communities coming one place, and we have a stall there, so you can know better about us. And we have an orientation program for the new students in September. So you are mostly going we are going to send the email, and you are mostly welcome to comment. So how you can contribute? everybody like every drops makes the big sea. So, oh, sorry. So you can attend our meetings, and you can do, if you are going to back to India, you can do some of the site visits, and you can be a volunteer for the fundraising, and you can monitor the projects, because each project is monitored by the air volunteers. Okay, and you can review the project and give your thoughts, like what you feel about the projects, how we can better organize the project. Okay, so this is where how you can connect with us. Okay, we can discuss little later, after the talk. So I'll ask Sakshi to introduce our speaker.
I'll keep this short because all of us are waiting to hear from our speaker, who is Kamayani Swami. She is an amazing grassroots activist in India who's been working with the Jan Jagran Shakti Sangathan, which is the rural workers' trade union in Bihar, a part of India, a state in India, northern part of India. And they work for, or they're fighting for workers' rights and against government corruption. JJSS is how Jan Jagran Shakti Sangathan is the acronym that it's known for. It has empowered the rural communities in North Bihar to struggle for their basic rights, which sometimes can be violated by corruption and other vested interests. So Kamayani in this talk about she will be talking about her work as a part of JJSS and also MBSNS, a trust to build local models of a just and equitable society. And so I will let us all welcome Kamayani.
So thank you for having me here. And so what I'll try and do is that I'll try and do 20 minutes of talking, and then we can open up for questions, and we can find answers collectively, because nobody has answers to all the questions that usually come. But logistically, regarding this presentation, I'll try and answer whatever it is. Does this photograph, is this a photograph anybody recognizes? Yeah, yeah, correct. So, the, would either of you want to say who the dervish is, or what that tradition is?
You get it to the right hand is up like this and the left hand is down like this. This is a receiving mudra, that is a giving mudra thing. And you just turn incessantly, no sense of beginning, no sense of end, no sense of time, but you just keep doing it. And once you've picked up the pace, you just go on. It's supposed to lift you into another ride.
Great, thank you so much. So basically, yes, this is an image of a whirling dervish, and as you say, the left hand is up and the right down, pointing the other way around. Right goes up and the left goes down. So this is how we look at it. We look at it like the right hand is trying to reach out to the sky, and the left hand is very much talking about being grounded here. And what we say is, or what I am trying to say here in that context is, that I'll try and make my presentation such that I'll try and talk about what I do locally as part of the organization I work with in Bihar. That's actually talked about. But at the same time, I'll try and make the connect between that local work and the larger desire for building a just and equitable society. And I hope I can do justice to that today. Uh, so this has not come out very clearly, but at the end it says Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And do many of us recognize the name Dr. Ambedkar? Most people would know. And who do we know him as mostly? Yeah. So he was somebody who we believe who gave us the Constitution of India, and that's when we became the Republic of India in 1950. And does anybody remember the year in which the Indian independence was gained? 47. Correct. So 47 to 50 takes time to build this constitution, takes effort to get it together. And Dr. Ambedkar works with a huge team of people. And this is what he's saying on the day finally making the final speech of the constitution to the country. And interestingly, this dilemma still lives. We have political equity, one person, one vote, but do we really have social and economic equity in the country. And that is probably the kind of dilemma that was faced by the founding fathers, because the mothers have not got recognized as much. But the founding fathers, this was the dilemma that they presented to us, and we still live with that dilemma. That's one of the reasons that the image on the right, I very consciously chose not to put Dr. Ambedkar there. But I put another Dalit friend there. Does anybody in this hall recognize the image on the right? Yeah. So that is Rohit Vemula. Thank you. So that is Rohit Vemula. And Rohit Vemula was a scholar in Hyderabad in the Central University. He was trying to raise issues of justice on the campus. And he came from a very modest economic background. And he was also comes from the Dalit community. And his scholarship was stopped, which led him to take his own life. Now, one can say it was a suicide, one can say that it was an institutional structural death caused by the kind of inequity that Dr. Ambedkar had warned the nation about. And if for anybody who can read the Devanagari script, it's there. But for someone who can't, this is a quote from Rohit Vemula where he says that the value of a person has been reduced to one vote. That's all what a person counts for. Anyway, with this in mind, we'll talk about the work we do and try and put a perspective to how it can build towards something. So the Jan Jagran Shakti Sangathan, literally translated, is a people's awareness campaign for building power of a collective broadly. We call it a non-party political organization engaging in democratic processes. When we say non-party political, we mean that we are definitely political in nature, but we are not affiliated to one political party. And it was a very conscious decision. It's an effort to be non-sectarian and not get caught within isms. We believe in the strength of the collective. The image on the right is a sketch of a. Yes, thank you. Yeah. It is a fist. But where is the fist coming out of? Does it? Yeah, it's blooming like a flower. It's the strength of the collective. It's an aesthetic beauty. Usually, when we raise our fists, we are usually showing strength. It's true. I mean, and all of us probably may not have been part, but have at least seen. I mean, this country has witnessed a lot of movements itself, from the civil rights movement to the anti-Vietnam War to the present day. Recently, I believe this Black Lives Matter. And there's a lot of collective assertion of the spirit for justice. And this image, we thought, very beautifully conveys the coming together of a collective, not as some sort of a threat, not as a group of some rabble-rousers, but the collective as a beautiful blooming of ideas of justice. And that's why I put this image there. On the left is communication. So basically, we also see our strength as being able to communicate with very ordinary folks like ourselves, who come out of very standard normative lives, yet trying to work towards the ideas of justice or a better society. So this is Mantuji, but just to make it simpler, this is a puppet who's having tea with two of our karyakartas. But the way Mantuji talks to people makes it a livelier way of interacting. But when I say politics, and I'm saying we are a political organization, what comes to your mind? If I say politics, what comes to your mind first? Just a couple of words. Anything? Anybody else? Vote bank? Okay. Vote bank? Consciousness? Vote bank? Anybody else? People who haven't spoken? Parties? Okay. Okay. Democracy? Yes, democratic rights. So consciousness, rights, democracy, parties, and vote bank. I mean, usually if I would throw open this question to a group of people who've not thought much about it, I would say it would come to politics being vote banks and parties. This is how it usually works in our mind. When we talk about politics, we think of it as a very small portion of the work we do. what do we see politics as? All of this that was said in the room, like all these five things that all of you said, is part of our politics. But fundamentally, we believe politics is about changing power relations, or at least challenging power relations. So this is a very common saying. I believe it's Chinese Confucius, but we heard it ad nauseum, especially if you got into the development sector. Give a man a fish and you give him a meal. Teach a man how to fish and you feed them for a lifetime. And then, while sitting on a college campus, figuring out development, one of our older students who had been out in the real world said, why does a man go hungry when they know how to fish and there is a pond full of fish? And that is the politics of why, despite having skills and resources, you don't have access to them, you end up being somebody who gets marginalized, or a community which seems to get marginalized. And of course, what I've said at the bottom, and we thought it was pictorially beautiful that it should be a woman saying all this and still be referred to men, men, men. And to us, this also needs to change. And when this gender imbalance changes, that's also part of our politics. Um, so, who are these people? Who are these people who are talking about change, people's empowerment? It's definitely not people like me. For us, it's a contemplation. It's an abstraction we love engaging with. But our privilege is very distracting. The fact that I'm here, the fact that I had the privilege of going back from the US speaks much. Uh, but the real leaders are people who, from the community, organically come out and realize that they have to speak up for their own issues and take leadership organizations that are talking about justice and equity. This image is of Radha Devi. She was covered in the newspaper. A small interview of hers was brought out in one of the national dailies, not on the national dailies front page, but the front page of our district town uh, edition. And uh, Radha Devi and her husband Deepnarayan Paswan, they come from the Dalit community. They have no piece of land. The land they live on is also not in their own name. And this is the story of many of the people who engage with the Sangathan. Yet, through talking about entitlements that the government promises through various of its acts and laws, starting from there, engaging with the collective, now they are the leaders of that area. And not just them as a couple, but many more like them. They now take up issues of land, they take up issues of pensions, rations, and whichever struggle their collective wants to engage with. And I think that is one of the beauties of the organization that I work with. And I'll tell you more about it, but the fact that we've just had a farmer satyagrah on issues of agriculture, and many of us, like me, are around talking about the work because it's their work. It's a collective. I'm part of it, but I'm a very small part. This is another very inspiring person, Mohammad Ayub. He's also a landless worker. He got engaged with one of the social audit exercises that happened in one of the villages of the district that I live in. We work in about 6, 7 districts of North Bihar, but this is one of the districts I work in. He started as a volunteer, not very different from Sakshi. Sakshi came from one of these social audit exercises in 2011. Ayubji happened to have met us in 2010. We are still in touch, and Ayubji is still part of the organization. In fact, he's got so interested in this kind of work that he has also become part of the decision-making body of the organization. And he spends a lot of his voluntary time with the organization. So he continues to be an NREGA worker, a daily wage earner. His son continues to go to migrates for better work opportunity, and that's how they run the household. But leaders like Ayubji, Radha Devi, Deepnarayan Paswan, what are the issues that they are primarily working with? Or what are the issues that their communities are taking up? It could be around rations, around the public distribution system in India. It could be around land rights. It could be around pensions. It could be around wages. It could be any, which I try and represent through the three blue dots, which basically means that depending on what the community wants to focus on, a struggle could be built around it. But fundamentally, it's an issue that comes from within the community. That's not how we started. We started with NREGA, which is the largest employment guarantee program anywhere in the world. And that is where we pitched our story because that's what we knew. But slowly we realized that the community knows so much more and the collective can do so much more, and they are. Um, but these are not the only issues. So, some of the issues that I think are direct challenges to institutions of power, for example, and just one example, is talking about police accountability. Now, making governance accountable is a challenge in itself, but getting law enforcement agencies to respond is something terrifically difficult. I think that this country also realizes, and we also realize. Here, I'm just taking this particular case, but let me also give you a context. And some of you may already be aware of the context. I'm not assuming anything. There has been growing violence in the country, what we call mob lynchings, some sort of a sporadic uprising of a group of people who are very angry, leading to killing of certain people because they belong to certain identities, communities. It seems to be happening, and it's become frequent. This particular case is in Araria district, the town I live in. 30 kilometers on a motorable road from our town is a small village. In that village, on 31st December 2016 and 1st January 2017, two men were lynched to death, and four of them were tied to this pole, those who survived, and they were beaten up. And you can see that photograph. And that photograph is not obviously something we do. It's a photograph that was printed in again the National Daily and the front page edition of our area. Four of them actually did survive to tell the story, and two of them actually deposed in a public hearing held on 28th February. The photograph on the right shows them deposing at the public hearing. Where does the police accountability come in? One, the lynching actually happened around a land dispute. Land dispute was never solved. Repeatedly, both parties kept going to the courts, to the civil administration, to the police. There were cases, there was ample reason to believe that this was going to lead to something larger, but no indication helped any of them, either the courts or the police or the civil administration, to solve the situation. It's not accidental that Rohit Vemula decides to take his life. It's not accidental that a national leader belonging to the Dalit community, Dr. Ambedkar, gives us a constitution and says, here is the challenge. And here the people who got lynched are also from the Dalit community. It is no accident one of the mobilizers is also from the OBC community, but because he speaks with the Dalit community, he gets lynched. Anyway, this episode itself is jarring, but I think the strength, and that's why I've put up this image and I talk about it everywhere I'm going, is that on the day of the public hearing, wherein all of us got together, and there were thousands in the field in Araria where we collected in the town hall field, we talked about how we faced abuse at the hands of the police, the corruption that was going on. The image at the top, for everybody again who can read Devanagari, they can read, but what I'm saying is every brick that makes the police station asks for a bribe. That's the situation we face. And just to be able to talk about it in a public space in front of so many people has a cathartic effect. And it reigns in power. When you talk truth to power, it reigns in power. At the same time, if you ask me what exactly was the benefit of the public hearing, I could also say that some of the cases that were presented were addressed. The so-called mastermind of this killing, who for 2 months had been absconding. 1st February, 20th February, was caught around the 8th of March. That was one. But as I talked about the dervish, in this being grounded in those local struggles, in that one lynching, in that one fight for land, we are not we're not missing the largest struggle. So we do try and make our connections. There might be a global understanding, but we are not part of any global networks per se. So there is a connect between the local and the national struggles. On the left is a mobilization around uh, the state of Bihar where I work, and this is the Bihar People's Parliament. When your elected representatives and legislators are not listening to the people, then probably it's time we talked about our issues. And this is also at the time of general elections. You can see 2014. On the right is one convention of the National Alliance of People's Movements and the role identities play in people's movements, because the issue of identity has become rather overblown. But it's time to turn the gaze inwards. So I'm going to talk about the other efforts that are also going around the struggle that I talked to you about. So they're like two coins, two sides of the same coin. There is sangharsh, there is struggle. You come out on the streets, you try and talk truth to power, you try and negotiate. Gandhiji used to say, cooperate where you can and resist where you must. And that's the path we take. We do try and use laws, we do try and talk to people, but we are not afraid to come out on the streets and talk about issues that we are not being heard. But in doing this finger pointing at the government, you also realize that every time you raise a finger to point out to somebody, there are three fingers that turn to yourself. And that's where we felt the need to do constructive work, the other side of the coin, which goes along with struggling. And that's where we decided that maybe we continued doing that for many years, like 5, 6 years, that along with struggle, we would try and take up constructive work, talk about issues that directly challenged us as individuals who were part of a larger organization. But then we also started realizing that it was very difficult to get people who are into a struggle mode and questioning of authority outside to look at how they themselves abuse their privilege, or how systems had actually tied them down in different ways. And so we thought we would have a separate effort, a separate sisterly organization. We call it the Mosammad Budya Nirman Sangathan. And uh, it, what it does, I'll go into just into the next slide. But why is it called the Mosammad Budya Trust? Mosammad Budya is the name of a peasant woman, maybe 100, 200 years ago, pre-independence India. It's said, and it's a folklore. There's some historic evidence that somebody called Mosammad Budya existed. But the folklore goes that she challenged indigo planters, and the indigo planters, the British indigo planters, therefore left from that area. And it's true that we didn't have indigo plantations in the area we live in. So there might be some truth to the story, but we were very happy to find our own local woman icon. And um, does the indigo planters challenge to the indigo planters have any special significance for anybody here in terms of the independence struggle of India? History lessons, classrooms?
That was the reason the company left it to British government to take over all the administrative work.
Okay, so not very sure. At this, I'm not very sure about, but what I'm definitely sure is that it was the Champaran Satyagraha, which was probably the first struggle that Gandhiji took up on a large scale. It was to challenge the indigo planter. And this is 100 years after that we, last year we're celebrating 100 years of the Champaran Satyagraha. And last year we were also registering the trust to do work inspired by a local woman organizer who had challenged the indigo planters. And this is the larger idea of what we want to be doing. For this, anybody is interested, I can mail them the proposal for what we intend to do. But along with doing a lot of things, we want to channelize our energies into outreach programs, take uh, education outside the reading, writing, and arithmetic, yet talk about the reading, writing, and arithmetic. This is a pictorial depiction of saying that this physical space that we tried to create as a learning center would be a space to facilitate these interactions. Um, Yeah. For some reason, the slide seems to be blank. Okay, all photos are disappearing.
Close and open. Maybe you can make it PDF.
Anyway, so the Samaj Budhiya Shiksha Nirman Sangathan, the MBSNS, has made a lot of effort to reach out to people across the age group, but especially focus on youth. Now, the interesting thing is that, so I know I'm making this like almost like a sales pitch, but I'm going to do this anyway. That 7 years ago, we had Sakshi as a young student come and volunteer in our organization. But I think that came from a certain kind of privilege we were giving to young students in so called good institutions of the country. So we had children coming from Delhi University, from Bombay University, law colleges. But interestingly, we didn't have the kind of youth which is sitting in this room right now and talking. And these young people we thought were so brilliant who came from outside and they inspired us and they did great work. Uh, but what about the young people in our own areas? What about the young people in families of our own members? What about Ayubji's child and Radha Devi's child? And my children. And then we kind of worked alongside other sathis and we had an internship program. In this particular photograph on the top, you can see this batch of interns. This is the fourth batch. So every year we have one batch of interns who are from the local community in the ages of 16 to till wherever, like 20s, whatever, early 20s, late 20s, depending on the kind of group that comes. And the internship program is now going to end on the 10th of June. But these young people spend a lot of time talking about what they think change is about how caste, gender, class, religious issues affect their lives. And they also go out into their villages with these perspectives. They come from these villages, but when they go back with these lenses of caste, class, gender, and religious and minorities, they have a different perspective to look at the same village. And it's also probably the first time that most of these young people are in mixed groups of boys and girls together. It's also the first time they interact beyond their own caste. And this is the first time that a girl has been outside their home in a different village by herself, unaccompanied by male family members. So it's a very interesting group to interact. The photograph on the right, I don't know, but did we mention the community service hour when we talked about aid? So the organization locally here, the Association for India's Development, meets for a community service hour. That 1 hour, it's like a giving to the community, and in that time they do these project proposals and pass. Right? Am I correct? Yeah. Okay. But this is like our community service time, where all these young people who spend time trying to understand the various hierarchies go out into the village and engage with children in that village, talking about, sorry, not talking, but playing with them games which are basic inspiration is drawn from ideas of peace and justice. So they're very non-competitive, non-threatening kind of games. And yeah, that's the giving back to the community part. I know I'm really overshooting time, but should I take 5-10 minutes more? Thank you. Uh, Now, this photograph, uh, our first batch of interns, this is the fourth that I was talking about. This is the first batch of interns, so 4 years ago. This is a group of Dalit youth, mostly in this photograph. So, most people know when I say Dalit, what am I referring to from the beginning of my presentation? Would any of you like to tell us? So basically, just to make it faster, the Dalit community is the ex-untouchable community in the Hindu caste system, we had the concept of untouchability, which meant that the so-called lower castes were not to be touched and they were impure. Uh, when you come from that perspective and you try and understand the history, it's a very difficult uphill task for a person from the Dalit communities to rise up and stand uh, on equal grounds with people of privilege. What is fascinating about this photograph and stayed on these PPTs for the last 4 years is these young people who are making the newspaper are actually crossing a big barrier. They're 16 to 24-year-olds. So we're thinking big deal that they're writing a newspaper. But it is a big deal. Because here are people from a community who were denied education and who now are being dished out terrible education in the public education system or the government education system, as we call it back in India. And for them to be bringing out this newspaper is a big thing. And 2 years later, they also brought out a fully printed newspaper. On the left, you can see their initial work, which is a handwritten newspaper. This, of course, one of my favorites. I think it's a beautiful way to reach out to people, cinema. And here is a mobile projector which does not require electricity. Basically, it requires a 12-volt DC battery. So you can go to a village with no electricity or no immediate access to electricity, and you can screen a film. You can screen many films, but it happens to be a beautiful scene from Mulan. Have any of you seen it already? That's great. It's a very nice film. Of course, you played it in Hindi and not in English. uh, but it's not just about going to the villages. It's not just the other who's deprived or marginalized. There are ways of marginalization in society. Patna, being a small town, not being like a Delhi or a Bombay, is like a parched land ready to soak water. And this is a film festival we were part of organizing in Patna, and tremendous response from people. Uh, the festival itself is like a workshop. These are documentary films curated by Amodan RP. He's a director, makes documentary films. He's from the state of Tamil Nadu. And it was a fascinating experience also because the workshop participants themselves came from very varied class and caste backgrounds. So it was the mix of the whole event also, which was very beautiful. How many of you have before heard of Rukaya Shekhawat Hussain? Have any of you heard of her? She's also one fascinating personality in Indian history, but she's like known as uh, one of first South Asian feminists. She was born in 1880, which makes her over 200 years old. She talked about the situation of the wheeled woman, and uh, then I happened to have heard of her when I went to a good college in Bombay. But when I came to Bihar, we also realized that many people had not heard of her. And a very interesting group did a dramatic presentation of her works. And this presentation is in our small town of Araria. And it's beautiful because many people actually told the group, don't go to that town. It's not intellectual enough, so you'll not get a crowd to listen to this. And it was beautiful turnout, and people could actually identify with it. It's sad that something written 200 years ago we could identify with, but we could. Mm. For efforts at challenging patriarchy require talking to men and women. This is a women's workshop in progress. We use one of these feminist slogans that was probably born in this country: our body, our right. And this is a very interesting thing. So I happened to meet one software engineer in Seattle, and Prashant mentioned that he had written an article after having met a friend who was also in Microsoft. I happen to have the friend from that talk. And uh, when talking to his friend, he realized that the friend who came from a Dalit community, who's the same age, has made it to the same space, has had such a challenging time. That article is available on the net, and I will pass on the link for any of you who are interested in reading it. And he starts the article with a quotation of Dr. Ambedkar, which says, let us do something to change the touchable Hindu. We're always talking of the Dalits. And then I started thinking about this presentation, and I said, maybe that's where we are coming from when we say we need gender workshops with men. Because where are the men who are prepared for the empowered woman? So we do these men's gender workshops. Basically, there are lots of things that happen. This just happens to be a photograph of where they made promises of making the household more egalitarian, which they did not live up to, but they tried. Mm, and this is just one of the activities we do take on, which is doing young girls day camps. We go on to the village, we organize a day long workshop in which my favorite part is just the fact that the girls have fun at an adolescent age because of the need to control women's sexuality and maintain caste purity. There is such a lot of waste of energy that most young girls are tied into chains even before they can enjoy their youth. And just the fact that they can have a little fun, me sounds like worth doing. Um, so I talked to you about the learning center in that esoteric diagram. There are these bubbles. That learning center is actually a space, physical space also. So it's not just a construct of people coming together. It's 100 feet by 100 feet small campus, but it has a huge hall to house about 200 people. And it also has these small huts now, which we've tried to make them eco-friendly. We have tried to source all our materials locally. And that's the in the left, you can see that little house that we've been able to make, that room that we've been able to make. And on the right, you see someone who would be from a background very similar to those that of uh, most people here. He is a student at IIT Mumbai, and his interesting connection with aid is that uh, his professor used to be an aid volunteer 15 years ago when he was in the US. When he decided to go back to India, he kept his connections going with different movements and groups. And Om Damani, when he met his student and saw the interest of the student, suggested that Goran come to us in our area and do a part of his academic work. And here he is trying to help us make mud bricks which are dried in the sun. So sun dried mud bricks. And of course, we can talk more about it if there is interest later. Bihar gets affected by North Bihar by floods every year. Do any of you remember, for those who studied in India in their school, uh, which is the river which is popularly known as the sorrow of Bihar? Yes, thank you. This is what we did. I mugged it up from my childhood. Kosi is the sorrow of Bihar, Kosi is the sorrow of Bihar, because that's how we learned and wrote our exams. You did rote learning. That same Kosi and its tributaries flood every year in North Bihar. Every year there is some little bit of relief somewhere as part of seva that we do. Last year, some of the local rivers flooded, and for the first time in the history of the town that I live in, was flooded. There was 4.5 feet of water in our own home, and that's when we realized the pain of these yearly floods. Otherwise, we used to say there are annual floods in Bihar, and of course, I empathized. I'm not trying to claim that I didn't have empathy. I'm a decent human being. But when it happens to you yourself, your perception does change. And now I realize the agony of having your house flooded with water. But anyway, so we ignored our house for some good 7 days because there was water and there wasn't much we could do. People present in the house had moved things to safety. And these are the kinds of things we ended up doing. A lot of fascinating experiences, immense voluntary turnout of people doing stuff, ensuring relief reaches far flung villages which are cut off from communication. But here I specifically picked up two photographs of health camps that were done. And this another aid connection is that on the right is someone who's called Dr. Ramanathan. Dr. Ramanathan is a medical doctor. He happens to be a friend of the founder of AID, Ravi Kuchimachi. And when he heard about the floods, he said, I can donate time. I can do Shramdan. And so he came all the way from Chennai and spent 7 days being in these areas, flood affected areas, doing 6 camps. And he came back and he said, what I see of the health situation is not just the floods. There is something drastically wrong. There is too much malnourishment and there is too much ill health to be explained by these floods. So we need to do something about the floods. And interestingly, there are groups who have offered to help us out, and we are hoping to take on a health program uh, around this. Why I'm mentioning in the last slide also, I mentioned in this slide also about aid helping Because as you may realize, there are laws in India which work, and one of these is a FCRA, the Foreign Contribution and Regulations Act. You cannot fund work back in India without an FCRA. So obviously, aid is not supporting financially the work of the JJSS or the MBSNS, but there are ways you're supporting us. You're supporting us by understanding that the work we do is meaningful. If you happen to think so at the end of this presentation, and you're helping us with a lot of voluntary support, and that has a lot of meaning. Um, Last thing, especially relevant for young people in general, but specifically for some who may be interested in taking on marriages in the near future or long run, if there are some who still want to. So this is one of my favorite things. So what is happening is, and what has probably also happened in many cultures, especially post-colonial cultures, cultures which were colonized, we tend to throw the baby with the bathwater. We can't do that. So maybe we need to rethink our rituals. They can be extremely tiring. They can be very unjust and iniquitous. So we thought about it, and when one of our Dalit sathis, two of them, decided to get married, and they didn't want unjust, iniquitous rituals to be part of their marriage ceremony, we all sat together and rethought the ceremonies. So we worked along with a priest who is from the Dalit community, who's a full time plumber and a part time priest, and figured out what were the ceremonies of North Bihar in a marriage, and then tried to rework them. We wrote down, and so we had a little marriage book for our Sathis, Vijay and Chandni. And I'm just taking one example of one particular ritual. It's called the Dhan Kutai. Dhan refers to paddy, and paddy is pounded in that ritual. Basically, the paddy is pounded in an agrarian society. It makes complete sense to do that. But the actual traditional ritual has the man, the groom, and his family members, male family members, pound the paddy and give the rice to the woman to take care of the kitchen henceforward. But what we did was, as you can see in the photograph, the pounding is being done by both the groom and the bride, and they are accompanied by men and women. And the men and women are not only their family members, but also community members who are from different caste and religion. And that is a big thing, because at the end, society works with everybody together. And I think that covers almost all of what I wanted to say. Just one last thing. And I want to quote a story that I've been hearing a lot from Aruna, who's been making presentations in different parts of the US because she was the keynote speaker of the conference. And she talks about Galliano. Have any of you heard of his name before? He's a Latin American poet, activist. And he was asked what he thinks of utopia and whether it will be achieved. And he says, utopia is like the horizon. You as you walk towards the horizon, it always recedes. You may never reach it, you will never reach it. But it's the process of walking towards the horizon, which is so it's the process of walking, which is beautiful. So probably ultimately, quality, as Dr. Ambedkar had said, may just be a dream, a fiction, but it's a fiction or a dream that we need. A just and equitable society, I was told by when I started this work 20 years ago, by one of our senior activists, he said, it will never be achieved in my lifetime, I know, but, and I may be saying the same 20 years later, it may never be achieved in my lifetime, but yet we go on, because it's the process which is so enriched. Yeah, thank you. And just one last thing. So the JJSS and the MBSNS do not take foreign funds, cannot take foreign funds by law, but we would be really happy if any of you feel like contributing to our work. As Indian citizens, if you want to make a donation to our work, you're most welcome. I have put a small piece of paper on the last table, and Sakshi